I'm here today with Thomas Bellezza. Hey, Thomas, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. This is nice to get a second conversation with you.
Yes, we did talk before, and I just want to let everybody know we tried to connect a little earlier, but my mic wasn't working. And thank heavens, Thomas, you know a lot about this, and you told me to update my laptop, which I did. So that worked, and here we are. So now we could talk.
See?
Thank you. So now I know we meet a lot of people online, and we met through a YouTube group, correct?
Yep. Yeah, I think it was Emma Bennett's YouTube where it's like,
Yeah.
yep, yep.
Yep, we met through Emma Bennett's group, and you were kind enough to make a post saying, I'm up for chatting on my channel with some writers. Is anybody interested?
Mm-hmm.
And I love to talk, especially when it's talking about writing and books. So I was like, me, I'll talk. So that's what happened. That's how we had our first conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
then, I mean, there was just so much to talk about. It's so hard to cover a lot of things in such a short amount of time. And then you have so many interesting things going on. We didn't get to talk about that. So I wanted to chat about that today.
Yeah.
And and first, I want to ask you, how did you start writing? When did that all happen?
Before I answer that, I love your shirt, by the way. It's a play on the word
Ah,
friends from the show, but
yes.
it's writers. Very excellent shirt. Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent
Thank
word.
you. Thank
Uh,
you. I appreciate that.
so how did I, you were asking what got me into writing?
Yes. Because
I,
you were originally a musician or no?
I was an illustrator
Oh, okay.
who became in comics, and then I became a musician, and then an actor, a comedian, and did everything.
I think that's
Slowly but
great.
surely. Oh, thank you. Yeah, but I started. I used to. Everyone in my family is Sicilian and Italian, so everybody tells stories. At the tables, you're like, all right,
Yeah.
Uncle Joey Joe, and the blah, 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 and you're just like, I always liked how the camaraderie built and how relationships built around these stories that you realize you end up hearing 100 times because they just have, at a certain age, you only have your 10 stories that you tell everybody over and over
The
again.
top 10,
Yeah,
right? The top
but
10.
they would get refined, and I'm like, how are they always still interesting? And so I started really paying attention to people around me, and then I started telling stories verbally. I would be like, oh, Bobby down the road, right? And then you would just get
Ah,
into it, and then I kind of started drawing. And while I was drawing, I would tell the story while I was drawing, and I must have been 6 or 7 or even 8 at the time.
oh, wow.
And my
That's
mom
young.
and dad, they would just be like, "What are you doing over there?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm creating a story," and like I would erase the image and then redraw image, and I would create these narratives. But when I was in fourth grade, my teacher told me, she said, "What do you guys want to be when you grow up?" And I was like, "I want to be a storyteller, a writer." And she's like, "You should look for a trade, because you can't spell. You have trouble spelling." And I was like, "Oh." So I started learning. I started
Oh,
focusing
wow.
on drawing, and that led me into comics eventually. And then I was very good, but I was the worst in the group, if that makes sense. Like these
It
people could,
does, yes.
I was good enough to get there and be at the table, but they were I knew I couldn't keep up with them. But they liked me, and they were like, "Well, what else can you do?" So I started inking, which is just like line tracing and shadowing and stuff like that. But that led into, "Do you write?" And I was like, I
Mm,
guess, like, but I wasn't very confident on it because I was told in fourth grade, and by the
that you
time I
couldn't
was,
spell.
yeah, yeah.
That's terrible.
So
What a
I did
dream
it.
killer that teacher was, right?
She was just a general teacher too, fourth grade. Not like it was like a spelling class or anything. But I have dyslexia, and they didn't really know what that was when I was a child in school. So,
Mm,
hey. But but I started writing the stories in comics, and that really got me excited. I was like, oh wait, I can tell stories. So what? I can't spell. There's someone who edits that. There's somebody who fixes the spelling. I don't have to worry about that.
right, right.
And that just led me down the road. So yeah, that's what got me started. Was basically my family telling stories, and then me playing with stories and drawing, and then kind of mixing the two.
And then how did you get music involved in that?
Well, so I was hired to draw a 2 foot by 4 foot image of the Jabberwocky from Alice in Wonderland, and or the Looking Glass or whatever it's called, and I did it, and this is before Photoshop, and the guy said, "Hey, I would love it if you could. I love everything, but could you change this one thing and do like this?" Which meant I had to redraw the entire picture. I did because he paid me good money, but then I decided that I think I'm going to be in music.
Forget this drawing stuff.
Forget the drawing stuff. I almost worked for Disney. I almost worked for TSR, which is Dungeons and Dragons, with illustration. D&D was I created a story world, which is what I write in now, is my story world. And but they went bankrupt when I turned 18, so I couldn't go that way.
Oh, wow.
And Disney owns your work; they own your doodles and ideas, so I didn't want to go that way. And I was like, you know what? Maybe drawing isn't for me because I know I was good, but I wasn't great. And I knew that. I knew there was something missing. I could do things. I could see an image and draw the image. I could copy other people's styles. I had a style myself. But at
Right.
the end of the day, there was something, just something missing where I knew I couldn't be great at this. And but I was really good at music. I wrote songs that people were enjoying. I just understood music. I grew up in a music family. My grandfather was a jazz player, played the Apollo, toured, all these things.
Wow,
So
impressive.
that was a part of my blood, and so I just was like, let me focus on this. And at 18, I changed my career, and I would say a couple of years later, I was starting to do it more professionally. And
Mm.
that's it. I did it for 10 years and retired. And then I was bored after 2 years. And I got into comedy. And then I got into acting. And then I started consulting and teaching people how to be successful in entertainment. People would hire me, companies would hire me to help their companies that were in entertainment.
Right,
And
right.
the next thing you know, I'm in SAG, the union for the actors. I'm working on film and
Yeah.
television.
Screen Actors Guild, SAG,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I was running for office within SAG. I had built a very good reputation and relationship with all the higher ups, and it was really great. And then basically, it was like a 1, 2, 3. I got cancer, COVID hit, my parents died. So
Oh, Thomas, I had no idea.
yeah, yeah, it was a lot, and
That is a lot.
that's what led me to go. You know what? I think I'm just gonna slow down. I think I'm gonna pull back, and I'm gonna focus on just writing. I'm gonna focus on anything that has to do with writing, from educating writing to. I just wanted to be around writing. It is my passion. It's something I love, and because that happened, I was like, I don't need money. I because of my career, I have
Right.
gotten to a position where I sort of get to say yes and no to things, and so I was like,
That's a
how do
great
I?
position to be in.
Yeah, it took a lot of work.
Yeah,
It didn't
yeah,
just.
yeah. Well, they say anything worth having, right, takes a lot of work,
It,
right? Or
it's,
if it were easy, everybody would be doing it. So yeah. And the
it
journey, huh?
was easier.
You have stories to tell from the journey too. And you love to tell stories. You're a storyteller.
Yep, yep, yeah.
So that helps too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that kind of life that also helps with the stories. Like when I'm writing a character, I'm not just writing like a character is doing stuff. I understand positions and motivations, and I understand, the consequence of choices. And there's, one thing I've learned reading more contemporary books or more, I would say, and this isn't an insult to people who are starting out, but there's a 1 to 10 book range where writers are still learning. They're still trying to figure out their voice. They're still trying, and this is not a knock at those 10 books, but a lot of those books miss nuance.
Mm,
They're filled with really great ideas. They're filled with interesting characters, and obviously their prose sometimes are really beautiful because they understand how to write, but they're not necessarily creating greater depth than this is happening, than this is happening, and this, right? And
right.
it's not a knock because the first 10 books, that's the work. I have to discover who I am in those books.
Right. I
It's like
agree
when I
with
started
that.
playing music, I wasn't the greatest guitarist and had my own style. I was playing Black Sabbath, you know.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you have to discover yourself through 15. I would say it took me 20 songs before I was like, I think I found my music. I think I found
Ah,
who I am as a writer musically,
right.
and so uh, I made sure I focused on that with the nuance. I think writing is really important when there's layers. When not that it's complicated. I'm not saying it should be complicated. I'm saying that there's layers and nuance. People aren't black and white. There's something going on deeper. Somebody could be loyal to somebody in a relationship, but have a fleeting feeling when somebody walks by them and they're just like, oh, there was something. Wow, wow, what was that? But what makes them who they are is I'm not going to pursue that. I'm going to control my adult impulses, but I'm allowed to feel what I felt. That makes me human. And sometimes that's missing in narrative is that nuance.
Mm, yeah, I agree with that. I agree. I think even some of the most famous writers, they say with their first book, they're not, and it's like actors and actresses with their first movie, the ones they like to just forget about, like Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey. They were in one of the Texas Chainsaw Massacres, and they hate talking about it
Mm-hmm.
because it was such a, because it was a horror movie and it was, for whatever reasons, but millions of people enjoyed those movies,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't like to talk about it. But they had to start somewhere,
Yeah, everyone
right?
has to start. So Robert De Niro was not Robert De Niro in Mean Streets. You know what I'm saying?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's growth. Everybody, like you said, we find our voice.
Yeah.
So it's not a knock, like you said. It's just the truth. So if anybody can look back at their, like I look back at my first book, and I say to myself, you cringe sometimes, and I had to go back and I had to redo it because there were a lot of errors. I didn't have an editor. My
Mm-hmm.
cover designer, my first book changed twice, but the first time I did have an editor that I met on Facebook, and she was great, and she did revisions for me, and then I changed the entire story. And then my cover designer, who was a sweetheart, and I interviewed her, I chatted with her a couple of weeks ago. She offered to help me edit my book, and she said, I've never done it before, I've done my own, but she helped me.
Yeah.
But then still it wasn't perfect. And then people were like messaging me and say, hey, Steph, there's a typo on page blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, this doesn't make
Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
on page blah, blah. And I was like, you know what? It's my first book. I really want to write my second book. I'm going to leave it be. I didn't let it bother me that much. I mean, when you first get that, if that feedback, you do go, oh no, like what next? And whenever somebody texts you, you're like, it's not another typo. I hope it's not another error. But then eventually one of my books got into a bookstore.
Oh,
So I
nice.
was like, you know what? It's time to, you know, fix that first book.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So I
Which you're
did.
allowed to do.
I fixed it myself the best that I could. At least it's better than the first version. But like you said, that first book, it doesn't have all the nuances. It doesn't have what it would have if it was my 21st book. So, and I think we have to admit that to ourselves as being a writer, because if we're going to deny that, that's creativity. We have to start somewhere, right? And we're not
Yep.
always going to knock it out of the park the first time.
I don't think anyone's ever going to knock it out of the park the first time with every new book because the first draft isn't meant to be perfect. It isn't meant to
Right.
have non-filter work. Like there's going to be filter work. He listened, she listened. That's going to be there
He
just as the
said, he
first.
said,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, he said, she said it's fine because it's invisible. But like he was listening, right? Like those are listening is a filter word. He saw is a filter word. Like he saw a wolf walk past the field. No, the wolf walked past the field. That's all you need to say. You know,
Right.
that you take out the filter word. But all great writing is rewriting. So at the end of the day, if you finish your first draft and you're like, this should be perfect, and then people are critiquing it and you're getting upset, you're forgetting the whole other part of writing, which is the rework, which is putting in the effort, which is you have to critique your own stuff. You have to break it apart. You have to challenge it. And I was just saying, I teach a writing class at a library now, and
Oh,
I,
okay.
I
Oh, I think you did mention that when I was watching one of your videos, when I
oh
was watching one on your show, The Right Mindset on
oh
YouTube.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Which library? Which library is that
It's
again?
one that's over in Louisville. It's a real nice library. They saw me teach a class that I did myself for writers. I did like a free class, and they were like, "Hey, we opened a new location. Would you like to teach? We love what you were teaching, and you know what you're doing." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I started doing that. But one of the things I was saying in that class was, one of the students, they were like, I have a hard time rewriting or reworking because I think it makes me a bad writer then because I have to rework it. And I was like, well, this is the truth about rewrites. save that file, copy it, paste it into a new file, and then break it. Play with it. Come up with ideas. Because at the end of the day, if you don't like the new direction, this version still exists.
Right.
So you're
That's,
not getting rid of it.
I'm glad you said that because that's what I've done. And I wound up though with so many files because I just kept on changing. Like I took that too far. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, yeah. You
I
have to
should have
say no
only had
sometimes.
two. I had like five or six. And then you're like, you don't, then yeah, I just totally lost track. But yeah, that's a great idea because that worked for me. I just made,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I told you, too many files.
Well, the best way to really approach it is you're going to have drafts anyway. So, like, I
Right.
have a zero draft, which is not prose oriented. It's just sort of like what is happening. Like this happens, this
Mm,
happens. They say maybe there's some dialogue, but it's just kind of like filler dialogue to understand their positions, the character positions. The first draft is where I write my what I would say functional prose, where it's
mm,
they're not pretty, they don't necessarily have my voice. They might occasionally leak into lyrical, but they're there to get the zero draft in pro form and to kind of like play through the behavior. And then the second draft is when I start adding the immersion, the emotions, how things feel, smell, the sight of things, the spatial elements, the tactile elements. And then the third draft is where I might, start cleaning it up. But
right.
in the first draft, when I'm writing that, when I get to certain moments, you would be like, oh, I got to do all this rewrite because I have to rewrite the scene. And that's why in the zero draft, everything is very general and broad. And I'm not worried about prose because I can look at it and be like, let me see what happens if I go this way with it. And it's just beats. It's like, all right, instead of going through this door, maybe there's a guy or a monster that shows up. And what would that look like? And then I just write out like quick lines of they fight the monster, they end up getting hurt, and now they have to find a way to stop the bleeding. Oh, that's interesting. Now we're finding there's a problem here. And then you could look at it in quick beats and say, is the pacing too slow now because I added all this? Is the pacing
Mm,
right? Before I even get to the prose. So I do a lot of the rewriting and a lot of the, or I say, organization of the narrative flow in the zero draft where it's not complicated. It's like very straightforward. Everything makes sense. There's no subtext, no convoluted there's no who is this, who is it, because everybody's name is, I use everybody's name every single time, just because you want to know who it is. But that helps me understand the foundation, so when I write my first draft, I don't have to do a lot of work other than adding the immersion in the second draft and adding, right, because I did all of the work in the zero draft.
right. Now, what do you write? Because I'm not familiar with your genre. Are
So
you?
my main genre is epic fantasy. However, I do keep in mind I come from a screenwriting background. Like I had a career as a screenwriter, so I wrote television and film stuff, and I pitched a lot of stuff.
Anything before we move on, and I forget to ask you, anything we would know or anything?
Well, I almost had two shows on television. So the first show I almost had was called Laundry. That was going to be through MGM. They had 5 episodes for me, but that all fell apart. And then I had a show called The Circle, and that was moving forward. I had 6 studios interested, and that is about the time I had cancer. So everything sort of went,
Oh,
it all fell apart. But I haven't written anything that you might have seen in the theaters. Or as a literary agent once told me, if you're not writing a Marvel movie, you're not a writer. And I go, but I pay my bills with writing. Like people hire me to write independent films for them, or they
right,
hire me to
right.
develop because I do developmental editing. Sometimes it's not this is what I used to tell people. I go, if you pay me to write your story, that's where it ends. It's not my job to get your stuff produced. Otherwise, you got to
Right.
pay me for another service, which is something completely different, which means I got to put hundreds of thousands of hours into getting people to believe me that your thing is going to make them money. But how is it going to make you money? Because writers, creators, things like that, people in the film industry, they think, well, I made this, so it's great. It's going to make money. But they forget this. Well, have you ever made money doing this before? No, but if you give me money, I will make you money. Yeah, but I already have money. Why do I need you to make me money? I make money with these things. And we forget that, oh, like, yeah, we're not a part of the process in the system. How do I get a part of the process in the system that has nothing to do
Right.
with me first? How do I start proving myself? How do I start helping others? You know, like as a writing assistant, I got more work working with others than I did trying to get my own things published or my own
Mm,
things created. And then that led to people saying, do you have any ideas? And they'd be like, I'd be like, yeah. And they're like, well, let's pitch it. Let's go to a studio. Let's go, you know, like I had one show that I was working on, and somebody was like, you need to submit this to USB, right? Or it's like a universal conglomerate, whatever. They're like a subsidiary, and there were 20,000 people that entered into this thing, and they were looking for very specific people, and we got two. We were second place out of 17,000, but they wanted to take us, but because I hate to say this, but they said to me, they go, look, we want to go more diverse people, and you're two white guys, and I was like, oh, all right, well, I'm not white, I'm pale, I'm white presenting,
I don't know.
unfortunately, you know, but I am ethnic, but I do not look it. But I stayed in touch with them. They loved dealing with me. You know, I followed the career of the person they did go for, and you know, it's just sometimes it happens, and we can't really be upset about it. It's just the industry. Because at the end of the day, what
Right.
is it about? It's money. It's not about story, and I think that's why writing novels is so fun for me, because I don't need a publisher, because I don't need money. I get to write now. I get to sort of like I'm 47, you know, and it's like Brandon Sanders said it the best. If you can see yourself writing for the rest of your life without ever making $1 from it, would you still do it? And if the answer is yes, then do it. And that is the answer for me. I don't do it to make
Mm,
money. I do it because I have these stories. I like this is my happy zone, and it is
right.
what it is, you know. So to answer your question with a short form, I write epic fantasy. But I also write like nonfiction self-help books. I have an outlining book coming out. I have 5 self-help books coming out.
Oh, wow, nice.
So yeah. The self-helps are done. It's just the first one. The audio is being recorded for the audiobook, and then the other 4 are being formatted right now, and then the outlining book I'm working on currently.
And who's the narrator? Do you do the work
I
yourself?
will be doing the narration for the nonfiction, but if I end up doing audio for the fictional stuff, I'm going to get other people.
Okay, so you have a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, you got to keep yourself busy. You know, I don't have a day job or anything. You know, I teach at the library, once a week, but it's only gonna be for 8 weeks. And you know, and hopefully they let me come back next summer or whatever the case is, because I really enjoy doing it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you know, I like to schedule my day too. You know, I don't just write all day because that would drive me crazy.
Right. Do you have like a slotted time that you write every day, or how
Yeah,
does
yeah.
that work for you? What does a day look for you? Look like for you?
Well, if I have clients, right? So if I'm consulting, you know, I do those during the day. If I have clients that I'm writing for, like if I'm doing ghostwriting or if I'm doing developmental editing, I do that all during the day. I don't work more than an hour for any one client. Everybody gets an hour. Then I have dinner. I watch an episode of television. I relax a little bit. And then at night, I give myself 2 hours. That doesn't mean I'm going to write for 2 hours, but it means for 2 hours, I'm going to be thinking about my story. I'm going to be editing my notes. I'll be writing, maybe. I'll be cleaning up something. Whatever it is, it's a 2 hour writing block, but that doesn't necessarily mean like it's me going, I'm going to focus 2 hours on this particular book.
Right.
And I do that for the epic fantasy. The self help stuff and everything I write during it, I'll do 30 minutes and I'll get like 3 pages done. Or like I've been writing a chapter a day for the outlining book in 30 minutes. So it's because it's all up here. I'm not really thinking, you know, it's like I'm just regurgitating.
Right. It's stuff you already know, and now you're
Yeah.
just typing it out on the cube, which that's what you do, right? You type, you don't, no
Yeah.
pencil and paper or pen and
No,
paper.
I have
Everything's
dyslexia.
everything's on the laptop.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know how that works. I know some people, like for me, the transition, I was so used to writing things down on paper that when I started writing my first book, it was hard to, because I've written things in the past, but I never did anything with them.
Mm.
But everything was, handwritten.
Oh,
So then when laptops came out, it was just so hard. I was still writing on paper. And I said to myself, and then I was typing it in. And I was like, I'm wasting so much time. I could be working on the story. I had to force myself
Yeah.
to work on the laptop because that's I guess a brain, right? That's a motor skill, I guess. It was difficult. It was very difficult to coordinate myself, but I did it. I mean, it
Yeah.
took a little bit of time, not a ton of time, but I did it.
It
So
is a different skill. I mean, right? I mean, you and I probably know how to write and script, you know,
yes,
and who
right?
does now? You know, it's not really something that I think they even teach in school. I don't know. I haven't
No,
been there for
they
years.
don't teach it in school. So many kids can't sign their own name. Well, now I guess even older teenagers and maybe young adults, they don't even know how to sign their own name.
Well, you know, it is a lost art. But again, like if I write
It is.
longhand, I have to write all in capitals because of my dyslexia. Because it
Ah,
confuses the symbols. Because writing is just symbols. So it just doesn't make sense. But on the computer, I don't have to write anything in the sense of like drawing out a symbol. I know where my fingers
typing.
go. Yeah, yeah. So it helped a lot. It helped me kind of sentences stop being confused because I would write a sentence like, for example, the cat ran across the road, and then I look at it and it says, you know, across the road there a cat, you know, and I'm like, I didn't write that.
Oh,
Or I'll start writing stuff that I wasn't even thinking, and what I was thinking wasn't written down, and I look at it and I go, I don't even remember writing that. And I was
oh,
like,
wow.
this is very, I can't do anything, like this is hard. And
Yeah,
then
it
once
doesn't
I
make
got
any sense, right?
at
You
all.
wrote it, but it doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
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 yeah. But I luck out where I can read. I can read very well. So my dyslexia affects me when it comes to transposing to paper. Like I get more
mm,
confused with that. But reading on the computer is easier than reading on a page because I could blow it up and not that I can, you know, I'm blind, but that the bigger the words, the easier it is to read. You know, so you have to find ways around dyslexia because it jumbles up stuff for some people. For me, it twists
mm,
things around. Letters look the same. So the keyboard works because I know where the letter is. You know, it's just more
exactly.
memorization than it is. You know, like H is always going to be where H is. You know,
Right. I
it's a
can definitely understand that. Makes
yeah.
it a lot easier for sure. And
And you would
now,
think the QWERTY keyboard, you know, like it's all randomly spread around the letters, but like I don't know. I don't know who came up with QWERTY, but they came up with a good idea. You know?
good, good. Yeah, it works. Now, you talked about editing. So, do you edit your own work?
So it depends. It depends. I am a developmental editor by trade, and that is where I basically look at the foundational work and like, is everything working? Are the character arcs there? Is there a clear cause and effect? You know, everything that makes a narrative a narrative. When it comes to like line editing, I do teach how to write prose. I teach logical narrative movement. I teach, you know, how to keep, like for example, sometimes writers will describe something and they're like, I wrote some pretty nice words. Uh, you know, they're like, look at these words, you know. But
Pat
what's
yourself on the back.
yeah, look at that. I didn't even use a thesaurus, you know. Um, but then you kind of have to think about that passage a little bit, and you realize, wait, this is not the character's description of what they see, and we're in third person limited, which means we have to be closer to the character than the writer. You know, omniscient narrator gets a little bit more leeway, but first person and third person limited, that pro needs to be written in the voice, or at least loosely or closely to that voice of the character. So if they're like an artistic, poetic musician character, there's a greater chance of more lyrical observations. Whereas if it's a tough fighting warrior who is like fight, kill, stab, they're probably going to notice different things if they both look at the same tree. And
Mm,
so that is something a developmental editor also looks at you know, if they're looking at the prose, right? Because you're like, well, whose chapter is this? Because this is really pretty, but like, isn't the guy like, isn't the character somebody who isn't educated? Isn't the character somebody who was a prisoner for X amount of, you know, since they were, you know? So it's like, this doesn't make sense coming from there. Yeah, but I love the way the imagery. Okay, then you got to make an omniscient. And they're like, why? Well, because it's the narrator's voice, which is the author's voice or the God voice. and we
Mm,
don't always think about those things. And
no, I'm really, yeah, as you speak about this, it's very interesting.
yeah, that's what I do when I come in. I edit like that. I'm not an editor in the sense of like, is the grammar correct? I'm not like a copy editor and stuff like that. But I can line edit in the sense of like I just said, is this making sense? We can maybe clarify this. It's disconnected from the character. Like that's sort of
Right.
like a line editor comes in and does that.
So, like a beginning writer, when they hand in, their work to the editor, I don't think they or we, because I'm not an editor, I'm a writer,
Hmm.
but I don't think we realize what editing really entails, like the way you explain it. Like the one character would be more lyrical, and the other character is more like hunt, kill, stab. So, they have to speak differently, and the editor, the developmental editor, such as yourself, has to look for that. So that
Hmm.
way, also, the characters don't get blurred, right? Like you
Yep.
said, they have to know who's speaking without actually saying, oh, it's the warrior speaking, or the warrior said, or the musician said.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very good point. So when we hand our work over there, and I know we talked that time that we chatted and we talked about editing and we talked about editors that do everything, and you were
Hmm.
like, well, that's not really such a, and I could see how maybe that is not such a great thing because some editors maybe excel in, like you, developmental editing. Like you know what to look for, you know
Yep.
where the voice is supposed to be coming from, and maybe the writer is not, getting that across to the reader the right way,
Yeah,
right?
but you
It's so
also,
involved.
yeah, I would agree with that. But you're also looking for editors that, like, let's say you have a lyrical style of writing, which I know you don't have a lyrical style, but you have a very straightforward. And by the way, that's a choice, right? But if you find an editor that likes lyrical, style of writing, and they're line editing your work, they're going to suggest, hey, we could pretty this up, and you'd be like, but that's not my, that's going to take away from my voice. So you got to find
Right.
an editor that also is comfortable with your style, your voice of writing. But yeah, I think what you're talking about is you wouldn't get a developmental editor to do developmental line editing and copy editing. It's just better to find somebody who goes, all right, my job is to focus on the line work. My
Right,
job is
right.
to we're focused on spelling and grammar.
And then it would take even longer. Just say the editor did do everything. It really should take longer to get your work back
Yeah.
because that one person is covering so many things, right? Am I
I
correct?
mean,
Or
yeah.
does it depend on the editor?
Well, at the end of the day, if I'm developmental editing, I'm going to give you notes. Then you're going to have to rewrite your book or rework it. Then you
Mm,
give it back to me. You're like, I believe it's done, and let's say we agree on that. Then line editing is going through and making new notes on the line work. So the flow of lines, is it logical narrative movement? Is there immersion? Is it making sense? Is it connected to a POV? So then you have to write and re-edit, or not re-edit, but rewrite all the notes, right? And then you're like, this is done, and let's say we both agree on that. Then you give it back to me, and now I go through and I make sure the spelling is correct and consistent. Is it English or is it American English? Because there's like, what is it? A color and color, color or color. OUR or OR,
oh, right,
right?
right.
Or
Hmm.
knelt and kneelt. So K
Knelt,
Knelt, right? Or
right,
Kneeled. They mean the same thing, but you got to have consistency. If you choose one, you got to always use it. So those are things like a copy editor might look for. So that process would take longer, but it also isn't really, the editor wouldn't do all three things in one sitting. It would just be a
right.
back and forth. But I would almost argue that most writers, especially today, might not always hire editors, which, again, you're independent, you're self-editing. I get it. So
Right.
no, there's really no judgment on that.
Well, some people, I guess, can't afford it,
Well, that's what I'm
so
saying. Yeah.
it makes it difficult for them. And then there's Grammarly and other things which are not 100% accurate.
I think I'm going to say they're accurate. The thing they're not doing is they're not thinking about author voice. They're thinking about what is the correct way to write this. If you're
Mm,
writing a thesis or a paper, that's what they're used for. But they're not like they might say, "Oh, try polite voice," or try a more polite voice, try a more active voice, try a more whatever the case is. The other thing is dangling participles and fragmented sentences, right? Creative writing allows you to use comma splices, whereas Grammarly would be like, this is wrong. And technically, it is wrong if you're writing a thesis or you're writing, but in creative writing, that comma splice or that dangling participle or that fragmented sentence may indeed add rhythm. It may indeed add to your voice. It may be a artistic choice for lyricalness, right? So the best way to look at any editing, Grammarly or a human being, is they're going to give you notes, and then it's your job as the writer to say, can I use this as a starting point? Do I use this completely, or do I just ignore it? Right? Like, you don't have to take anybody's notes, whether you're using
Right.
the AI of Grammarly or whatever the case is, right? Like, you could just be like, I don't agree with this. And you should have a choice, because you're the writer. The
Right.
help is not the writer.
It's your creativity. So it's
Yeah.
no longer creative when you use what you're getting from Grammarly, word
Yeah.
for word, or your editor word for word. Because like you said, right, it takes away your voice. It takes away your writing
Yeah.
from your
But
writing.
you also have to include genre. Like, for example, if I wrote she ran across the cobblestone. Her boots. That would be a comma by it. She ran across the cobblestone, comma. Her boot, or actually it's a semicolon. Her boots clanged against whatever the crumbling road, right? And then period. Like, technically those should be two sentences, but it creates that is like a flow, right? But then, like, let's say I have that period and I go, it reflected off its scattered clags echoed off the side of the buildings. Technically, it is ambiguous. What is it referring to? But if you use logical narrative movement or you're an adult, it is referring to the last defined element. So in that case, it would be the boots, because the boots are doing something against the stone. So period, it, or they, you might say they if it's boots. If it's a boot, it'd be it, right? But in young adult, you would say the boots, because you would get rid of because the younger the reader, the more specific and the less inferred you can be. You wouldn't infer they like each other with flirtation. You would be like, they like each other. In like middle grade, they'd be like, oh, he really liked the way she talked to him. Like, you would say that.
Right, right.
So that also influences how you edit the book. Is like, am I editing for an adult audience, epic adult audiences, or am I editing for to market, or am I editing for literary? And there is a difference between literary writing and, say, market writing. Literary writing is like a Hemingway, whereas a market writing might be a Susan Collins. Because we're not going to study Susan Collins in school. It's just not going to happen.
That's not going to happen.
You
So
know,
let me ask you this. How do you feel about the writing taboos that they say, like, don't start your story with weather and things like that? Like,
weather
how do
as
you,
in like
yeah,
storm.
like they say, don't start your story with the weather. Yeah. How do you feel about that?
The rule of thumb is do whatever you want, just give it purpose. So if somebody, I often say to clients and or students, I say, if it is description for description's sake, either get rid of it because that's for you, not the reader. Oh, but I'm trying to create atmosphere. Well, then you got to put the character's point of view in. And now it has purpose, because what is the character noticing? The weather. If it is just weather, it is doing nothing. Something is happening, but nothing is happening. So you have to add the character. So I always say, do whatever you want. Just make sure that it's going through the POV of a character, so we understand their emotional experiences and choices through what is being described. And now it gives an emotion.
And how about cutting, I'll say, the fat in your story? Like, how do you know when you've taken out too much or you've left in too much? Like, how do you know when to remove it to keep that story moving? And,
Great question. So logical narrative movement again is always basically what that is, the simplified version is you write a sentence and then some form of element within that sentence is defined or built on or qualified in the following sentence, and so forth and so forth. So you're always taking an element from a sentence and building on that element, and so forth and so forth. That creates a fast read because there's less thinking involved. I'm not talking about pace. Pace is the speed at which information is presented to the reader. A fast read or a slow read is based on how the reader understands or doesn't understand. So logical narrative movement helps the reader understand quickly. There's no second guessing. There's no like, well, what's going on? Like jargon, like science, sci-fi, technical jargon would slow down the read. That doesn't mean the pacing is slow. It means that the pacing could be like he grabbed the floop floop and touched the button and the ship went boop, boop, right, and like I would the slow read is like what's a blah blah and what's a cookie, right? But the pacing is fast because it's quick information without going into the detail of it, right? So when it comes to fluff, if you have logical narrative movement, A, everything is connected to something. B, you should be through the POV of a character. And C, you're not describing or doing exposition for exposition's sake. So too much or too little is based on, well, did I take away the context? If I did, that was too much. If I have too much information, one second. If you have too much information, which goes into description and exposition, now you have too much. That's the fluff. The fluff is not doing anything. The fluff is for the writer, not the experience. And don't get me wrong. Sometimes, like, you know, it's nice to be like, oh, the castle walls and like the paintings, and I want people to know how big and beautiful this castle is. Well, if you want to do that, break up the description through the character's POV. And now it's not fluff because it is teaching us about the character. It is not just look at this castle. It is the character is experiencing this castle. The character we're learning something about what they're choosing to look at. Because if you and I went into, say, the Sistine Chapel, if anyone knows, the painting is fairly large on the ceiling. But the first thing you notice is not going to be the first thing I notice.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a character choice that teaches us about who we are.
Now, you discuss all these things on your YouTube channel as well, right?
I do, yeah. This is in great detail.
The right mindset. Now, what made you start a YouTube? I always get tongue-tied with that. A YouTube channel.
The YouTube channel. Well, like I said, COVID hit, and then I lost my parents. But before that happened, I lost my mom first. And then, since my father was old and sort of needed somebody to care for him, I moved back home to take care of him. Well, I was there to sort of be like I need some me time. I was like, let me do this channel. You know, I want to do it. I want to take it seriously, but at the same time, it's about writing. So it's something that I love, and I'm passionate about discussing it and communicating it and building community. At that time, I started the Team Rise Together not-for-profit because I was going to start building on that, you know. But unfortunately, my father got really sick from COVID because it was all during that time. And he couldn't breathe, and he lost the ability to breathe. And, you know, we obviously lost him.
It was a horrible time. Yeah.
It was pretty crazy. COVID in general, not even just the loss of my father. But after that, because I had already started the YouTube channel and I had made the decision, I think I'm going to slow down. I think it's time for me to sort of like, and then I lost my dog 6 or 7 months after that. So, you know, my dog was my life. If anyone knows me, like I've cried maybe 3 or 4 times in my life, and I mean cried. When I lost my dad, I was inconsolable, and when I lost my dog, I couldn't even breathe. I was just out of it. So the only thing I could do was say, I have the ability to step back. I'm in a position where I can do this. I deserve, you know, I've been working straight since I was 12. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was time to be like, I think I've earned a slow down, you know, and that's why I really focus on the YouTube channel now.
And you knew it was going to be about writing.
Yeah, it was going to be totally about writing, but specifically the craft of writing. and not
Mm.
necessarily the business, because everything up until that point was always business. Because I people looked to me, hired me, or brought me onto projects for the business of music, the business of the entertainment industry, the business of the writing industry, and I was just kind of tired of being like the, oh, somebody's calling me and, hey, can I ask you a question about, and I'd be like, you know, my dad just died.
Mm.
And they're like, "Oh, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry." But anyway, like if I'm approaching a producer, and you're just like, "Okay," so I that's actually why I wrote the self-help books, because I was like, you know what,
Oh, wow. Great idea.
I'm gonna get all the information that I know out of my head. It took up 5 books, and if anyone ever asks me for help on the business, and I go, "Yeah, yeah, that's book 3."
Perfect. Perfect. Good thinking.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
it's
when you started your channel, what did you start with? Your cell phone? What equipment did you have? Like when you first began?
I had a really nice camera. This camera's like I just got a new camera. This camera, I love this camera. Uh, but I had a regular web camera because I was doing podcasts for business, like how to be successful in entertainment, and so I had that camera. So I started with that camera, and then I wrote out my scripts. And at first I was like, I need to look at the camera. And then I was like, but I have all this information. I wanted to be specific with my info, and I didn't want to sort of just ramble like I normally do if I don't have a script. So I started just reading it, so the camera would be looking at me. And I used to start off my videos like, all right, I'm going to be reading a script I wrote. So I'm not going to be looking at you, but I want you to learn this stuff. And then and then after a while, I just stopped that, I would guess, negative talk where I was like, I'm reading. Like I just was like, anyway, all right, so this is the information, and I would just read, and I think that's what I do now still, except for the live stuff. The live stuff's all off the top of my head,
Mm.
because it's just me communicating with people. But yeah, I started with a camera and a script, and that's it.
And so what do you have now? What kind of mic is that?
This mic is a Roto. I had a smaller version of this. I can't find it. It was the same kind of mic, but it was the smaller version. It was a little black one. And it was usually used for podcasts. This is for singing and like doing voiceover stuff because, I was an actor. So I have it. And the other one was dying, so I just switched to this. I don't recommend getting this one's $900. Whatever it was ridiculous. But I got it years ago, so it might be cheaper now. But
Possibly, possibly,
yeah.
but who knows with inflation, it may even be more money. You might have
Well,
got a
yeah.
bargain. It might have
Well,
been a deal.
they're
You know.
probably like 3 models higher than this one now. You know what I'm saying? Like they're always changing. But yeah. So I got this, but this is really for singing and like doing like, anyway. So on Thursday,
You can start a radio show with that, other than your YouTube channel.
Yeah. Well, I have the podcast. Yeah. So.
Yes. Oh no. Because when you went like that, it
Oh
reminded me
yeah.
of
The storm is coming.
Yes, exactly. When you did that, that's what that reminded me of. So something that I thought was fun that you did when I hopped on last week or the week before was you had taken an author's work and then made comments about how maybe you would have done things a little differently. I thought that was interesting. That was interesting to watch
Yeah,
and listen to.
that's the Rewrite the Great series that I do, and
Oh, okay.
I think I'm on like I just did the 6th one on Saturday. But it's not to be like this writing is bad. This is what I would do to make it better.
Right.
The series is about author's voice and
Mm.
how like plot is plot. And people are always like, people are going to steal my story. And like, people have already stolen your story. There are only 7.
Right. As a matter of fact, they're stealing someone else's story, right? They don't
Completely.
Realize. They're stealing someone.
Like Game of Thrones is not unique in the sense of like there is, a child who was connected to the throne and they're unknown as the bastard or living amongst other people and eventually rise up and do they take the throne? Like that's not new. Right? The Chosen One is not new. Like how many Aragons, not that we should be watching that movie or reading those books, but how many Aragons are there? Like you're a chosen one. By the way, I end up having magic powers. Oh, great. Oh, and I have a connection to an animal. Like that's been told a million times. So the series itself is focused more on our voice. And our voice as authors change the way we approach plot. So what I
Mm,
do is I try to maintain the plot points that are in the passages that I'm doing. So I only do like the first 4 passages. I don't do a lot. So I keep the same plot points of the passages. I keep the same POV. So if it's first person, third person, limited, or omniscient, I try to stay there. And then those are the 2 main rules that I give myself when I do it, and I talk about that at the beginning of the video. But then I rewrite it in my voice. I don't change I don't change plot at all, and I don't change the POV. And my style is lyrical. My style is cinematic, meaning that I am a very visualized person because I come from film. So I'm looking at camera shots. Is this a close-up? Is this a mid? Is this an establishing shot?
mm,
So I allow my prose to sort of kind of like be driven by what is the camera looking at. But I also move through character. I'm a character-driven writer, and I'll take a scene that might be very telling. Like I did Game of Thrones, and instead of it being about like Bran was in his 7th year and he walked among his brothers, which by the way isn't bad. Obviously, he made millions of dollars. But I start off. I talk about how the wind breezed around inside his cape, cooling at the nape of his neck, and now the chill of weather. It's been winter for whatever years, is now connected directly to Bran. I also talk about how Bran avoided the judgment of his brother Rob's eye, trying to avoid the embarrassment of being his first time out, or whatever the case is. And to me, that's all through character. Doesn't make it better or worse, but those choices are what dictate our author's voice.
yeah, I thought that was very interesting and fun to watch
Oh, thanks.
too
Yeah.
at the same time because while you're watching it, and you say to yourself, "Well, I would do this. What's he going to do? What's he going to say?" So it was a little interactive in a way because,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and sometimes some of the people who watch, because I encourage them to, they'll rewrite the scene in the comments.
Oh, see,
You
that's
know,
so cool for anybody
yeah,
who's interested in doing that. That's yeah,
yeah, because no one is wrong. None of the choices are wrong. You know what I'm
right.
saying? Like
Because it's your own voice.
it's your voice. The only thing that would make it wrong is if you set the parameters, which is I'm going to stick to the plot points and I'm going to stick to the POV. So if you don't stick to the POV and then you just change the complete plot, well, obviously you're doing it wrong because you're not doing the exercise. But
Right, right,
but you can make any choice you want when it comes to your voice because it's your voice. There's no wrong choice to your voice. You know,
right.
you could
Yeah,
be
exactly.
mechanical. You could be like Rob was to his right and Bran on his horse. Like you could write it like that and it wouldn't be wrong. Would it be interesting? Maybe, maybe not. But it doesn't make it wrong. It's your voice.
Right, right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, very fun though, if anybody wants to check that out. So now how many times a week do you record? How
Um,
many times a week do you do different episodes or cover different topics?
Yeah, I'm a little tricky with that because what I do is last year I took 4 months. So 2 months I wrote all the scripts, and then 2 months it took me to record all the videos for the year, and I recorded a Wednesday and Friday video. So those are taken care of until the end of the year. In October I'm gonna have to start September I'm gonna have to start writing the next year's scripts. And by the end of December, I should have all the videos recorded for the following year.
Wow. That's because you worked in TV, maybe that helps you out a little bit instead of
Yeah.
people that are, just like winging it and throwing it out and recording every week and showing it like the next day or two, that's me, which is what I do.
Well, again, I
Because it's
slowed
just so
down. Yeah.
hard.
I was like, I don't, if I'm going to be stressed or I'm going to have to be like, I got to make another video, I'm not going to do the channel. So my
Right.
brain was like, well, in TV, they do batch recordings. They film a few episodes, or at least half the episode, and then they air it. And then while those are airing, they're filming the second half of the season. And I was like, or a film. They don't film a scene and put out the scene and then film they film the whole movie.
Right.
So I was like, let me just film the whole season, and then I'll be good. And then I could just focus on the live videos, which don't take me anything. It's Saturday, Sunday for 2 hours. And I love the live. The live is probably my favorite thing in the world. But other than that, I used to do 2.5 months worth of so basically 10 videos. I would record 10 videos,
Mm,
and then while those were airing, I would record the next 10. But like last year, I was just like, why don't I just do the whole year?
Right. Oh my gosh, what a great idea. And what a
Yeah.
time saver too. And then you don't have to go crazy thinking about what you're going to talk about. Because then, like you said, you go live.
Hmm.
So then you could just cover whatever you're covering in the live.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you don't have to, yeah. So I think that's great. And I think, I'm sure other people do it too, but I think it really helps with your background that you're just so used to doing that.
Yeah.
That really
Yeah.
helps with your YouTube channel. So if you had like a piece of advice to give, writers or editors or anyone in the industry, just a general piece of advice, what would it be?
Uh, would that general advice be lean towards craft or lean towards business?
Well, you know what? Let's do both. Let's do craft. Let's start with craft.
Craft is much easier. Craft is don't only practice when you write. That general advice means that most people practice their craft when they're writing their book. And your book
Mm,
will suffer from that because you're not practicing how to write immersion or how to write dialogue or how to write whatever it is you're trying. What is subtext? Like, well, write some scenes out that are subtext. Yeah, but that takes away from my book. I would rather just write when I write. So, my advice to most writers, musicians, actors, or whoever, don't just practice when you write. Imagine being an actor and the only time you practice is when you get cast in something, but you realize you're not getting cast in anything because you don't practice outside of right. Well, I'm not going to
ex-
practice acting if I'm not in a role.
yeah.
You gotta memorize monologues and like try to find out and break. How do you break down a script, right? Like those are things,
Right.
right? But writers need to learn how to practice outside of writing. So that's my general advice for craft. You know, when it comes to business, though, uh,
Mm,
there are two brains. There's your business brain and your artist brain, and they should never ever play with each other ever. They do not let them play. A business brain is how you make money. An artist brain is how you create. If you create with artist brain playing with the business brain, you're going to try to write something that sells, and you'll never make any money, and vice versa. If
mm,
you're trying to be like, well, what is my art is? I'm so awesome, amazing, and unique because I wrote this. You already failed, right? So um, my general advice when it comes to business is your book has nothing to do with sales. And people go, what do you mean? I go, well, write your book, put it in the closet, wait for people to knock on your door. If they don't knock on your door, my point is proven, right? Yeah, but if they read the book, they're going to love the book because I wrote it. Okay, well, how are they going to read your book?
mm.
Are you going to read it to them? Now they're not going to listen because you're pushing. Pushing does two things: it pushes an agenda and it pushes people away. If that was the case, every time you walk past someone and said, buy my CD on the street, you would buy it. But you don't because you're like, I don't know who you are because you don't have a relationship. So the business brain says build and cultivate relationships through your brand value by marketing who you are, why you do what you do, your expertise. Like, for example, I talk about writing. So now people will believe that I can write. But I also show writing examples in real time and I show how I break down stuff. So now people go, wait, this guy knows what writing is. So I know he's an expert and I could go to him for expertise, right? But
Right.
I never went to 2,100 people who are subscribed to my channel each and said, you should subscribe to my channel because it's amazing. No, I had to first create a brand. Then I reached out and I became friends with other people in the community, right? And now their fan base was like, oh, he has a fun personality. He's making jokes. He does random singing. He laughs. The people he's talking to are enjoying themselves. I wonder what he does on his channel. And that has nothing to do with writing or my books. It has to do with me as a personality. That's why I love doing interviews because it technically has nothing to do with writing. It has to do with my positions on things or like you said, what are your thoughts on weather at the beginning of a and then I give my position and someone could either agree or disagree with that. If they agree with it,
Mm,
they're going to be like, let me see what else this guy has to say because I agree with his position on weather should be written through character POV.
right. That's why I love doing these talks because I love to like hear and know what's on other writers' minds and how they feel about things. And I'm sure everybody does, but maybe they don't have a writer in their life. They have no one to like talk to about it, bounce
Mm-hmm.
ideas off of. So that's why it's so good to have these channels like yours,
Yeah.
the right mindset, which I
Oh,
think is fabulous.
thank you.
And I'm going to include the link in the comments. That way people can tune in because you have so much knowledge
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
in what you do. You know what I mean? And it's true, you do make the episodes fun.
Oh, yeah. Well, I try, you have to have, like if you can't, like one of the things somebody said to me once, who's not necessarily a writer, they're just people I know, and they were like, "You make a lot of mistakes on, because I don't edit my videos. I don't.
I don't edit it either, no.
I just film it, because I'm reading off a script,
Right.
and then I riff on it a little bit. But like when I'm doing real time examples, because I don't have anything pre written. So if I'm teaching a lesson, I do it in real time so I could work through the process out loud so they can hear what I'm doing. But I'll spell words wrong. I'll use poor grammar. But then what do? As I'm working through the video, I'll adjust, I'll fix, I'll clean it up. And the reason I do that is because all great writing is rewriting. All great writers have great editors. But more importantly, it's a process. And there's a stigma in the community where if I can't spell, or my grammar's bad, or I'm not writing great the first time, I'm not a good writer. And I know I'm a great writer, right?
Right.
So I'm not going to allow my bad spelling and bad grammar in my first draft to dictate my value. And I'm trying to inspire other writers to see that it is a process. Hemingway did not finish. There's no way Hemingway wrote a page and then was like, done. This page is perfect.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
it's just, no one has written Spider-Man, the movie Spider-Man, right? 20 years it took to get to the screen. That means they had to write and rewrite that script. That means they went through a couple directors, a couple producers, James Cameron being one, right? Scripts need to be worked. A quick aside, just for people for writing in general. When I was in the screenwriting business, one of the things that I always found funny was writers would always try to get their scripts perfect, and then like, it's perfect, now I can pitch it, and I would go, they're either not going to keep you on, they're just going to buy the rights and the license to your script because you don't have a name, and then they're going to give it to a name, and they're going to rewrite it, rework it, and clean it. Then they're probably going to give that to somebody and clean it up. And they're like, no, they're not. They have to hire me. I go, they don't have to hire you. But more importantly, if you've ever seen Pretty Woman, which was originally called 3000, you would know that the original writer had nothing to do with the final product because he was hired. Disney bought the script. Disney, of all people, bought a prostitution film that had to do with heroin, death, murder, and sex. They bought the script because they
Crazy.
loved the concept of what the script was, but they ultimately were like, throw it out, keep the beats. There's a hooker, there's a wealthy person. They fall in love. They're two people from two different worlds: the prince and the person who lives in the tower.
The pauper, the prince and the pauper.
Right? Yeah, right. Every story's been told. And then they basically had someone come in and rewrite it, not the original writer. Then they had another writer come in and rewrite it because they couldn't capture the essence of what they liked about the original. So then Penny Marshall's father, what's Penny Marshall?
Gary, or was that her brother?
Gary Marshall. Yeah. Was it Gary?
I don't know if that's her brother or her father.
The father, the guy who created Happy Days. Right?
Why can't I think? Oh, I hate that.
Woman director. Gary Marshall. Yeah, all right. So Gary Marshall said, why don't we hire the original writer back? And they were like, because he's nobody, and they're like, just hire him. I'll keep an eye on him because, Gary Marshall's Gary Marshall. He knows what he's doing when it comes to story.
Right.
He came back, he rewrote the script, and they're like, let's get rid of this guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's not a very good writer.
Again?
They got rid of him again. So then Gary Marshall then just took the concept of the story and he started writing it in real time when they were filming scenes. So that movie's written mostly through improv. And then the plots are just like, where they met, who they are. Like all that is the essence of what made the story work. She was a hooker who didn't want to be a hooker. He was a wealthy guy, right? Like all those things were there, plot. Right. But Gary Marshall, being the storyteller he is, was able to create improvised scenes and say, all right, let's make it go this way. Let's do that. So at the end of the day, what you write it doesn't have to be perfect because it can still
And
sell.
I just want to say this too, because I read that the scene where Richard Gere has the necklace and Julia Roberts sticks her fingers in there and then he snaps it shut. That wasn't written. That wasn't written in the script either. That was
Yeah,
something that Richard Gere just did, and it's one of the most memorable scenes.
yeah,
And
because
it
their
came from
laugh is
the
so.
actor
Yep.
and the actress's natural reaction,
Yep.
which is
Yeah, it was
fascinating.
a blooper that they were like, wait, I think this works. I think that we can keep this in.
It did. That was
Yeah.
such a natural laugh of hers because she was actually laughing because she didn't expect that. I love to read about those things when I look
Hmm.
things up and facts about certain movies or what I didn't know. And you
Yeah.
really get some good information like that. But yeah, so I guess they bought the idea from the guy, from the writer, and
Hmm.
then they just cut him out.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like even R.R. Martin, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the guy who wrote Game of Thrones. A small author, just started. They basically purchased the licensing rights to make his film or his television show. They Now we all know that R.R. Martin was also a screenwriter. Though. I don't know if you know that he was a sci-fi writer and a screenwriter, and he wrote the 3 seasons of Beauty and the Beast with Ron Perlman and Linda Hamilton, who only
Oh,
did 2 seasons.
right, right. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he understood screenwriting. So he was like, "Can I write some of the episodes?" And some of the best episodes of season one are George R. R. Martin scripts. But
Oh,
Dave and I forget his other name, but Dave, the two head writers, they added some really amazing scenes that were not necessarily in the book, and that's why when they left the show after season 5, whatever, the show kind of went, a little bit. But
yeah.
yeah, because the direction wasn't there. But I will say this: so when we write books and people purchase it, they're licensing the rights to use the identity, the themes, the tones, the character names, right? However, you can fall into the wheel of time, where they took a story and they wanted to write a different story, but they didn't have any brand value. So they purchased something like Wheel of Time, and they're using these characters to tell the stories they want to tell. So then we lose the essence of what Wheel of Time was, or even the Rings of Power, because they don't have the right to actually tell the Silmarillion. I don't know if you know that they
No.
didn't gain the rights to tell the Silmarillion, but they gained the rights of the Lord of the Rings movies. So they're basically just telling stories using these characters, and that's why you get weird, convoluted kind of like what is going like. Great, Tom Bombadil's here, but like I don't understand what's going on.
Right, yeah. Yeah, sometimes you can tell I mean, I don't watch that show when I haven't read the books, but with other shows, you can tell when there were different writers on board, how things changed.
Hmm.
Just things are different. Sometimes the characters don't act. Sometimes we get mad at the characters that we love,
Oh yeah.
because they acted a little bit out of character, and we don't know why we get mad. But
Well,
maybe
yeah.
because it's a different writer on board, or maybe they're trying to try something different. I don't know. I guess it could be like a multitude of reasons.
Well, newer shows like stream shows, they fall under. They recently had the right. Not recently, it was probably 2 years now, but they had the writers' strike, and the reason is because they were
Mm.
hiring random writers to write random episodes. In the old days, the olden days, back when I was more involved in it, you would have a head writer, somebody that had basic or head writers, and they had like a creative direction. They handled like the tone,
Mm.
and then together with a team around the table, they would like brainstorm the season, and they'd write stuff on the board, and then the head writers would take all that information based on everybody's insight, and then they would work out and map out these episodes, and then those episodes would be given to writers. They go, all right, you write episode 1, you write episode 2 and 4, you write episode 6, I'll handle episode 8, whatever. And then they would write it, and usually an episode, a season might be 10, 12 episodes. If it's more like an NBC, it was 23 episodes, right? But now with streaming, it's 6 episodes or 8 episodes if you're lucky. So you got to cram in all of the plot points you need to make sense of something. Usually it's multiple different writers sort of like writing off of a synopsis, and
Mm.
it's a different kind of style. But I know that Daredevil Born Again, I don't know if you've heard, it's on Disney Plus. So there was a show called Daredevil, and a bunch of my buddies used to work on it as a little side. but they basically brought it back. So Daredevil Born Again, and they filmed basically half the season. Kevin Feige was like, "This isn't working," and they were doing it with the you write this episode, you write that episode, you write that episode. So they fired all the writers. They hired a head writer, and then got a team together, and then they released the season, and the season's brilliant. It's just a really strong,
Yeah.
articulate season, So
It worked. And I guess now everybody doesn't have to be like together in a writer's room, right? Because people can just Zoom
yeah, it's still a
or
writer's
whatever it
room,
is
though.
they do, StreamYard, and it's still considered a writer's room.
Yeah, because a writer's room it has a purpose. So you have your head writer or head writers. You got your first chair, which is basically like the if
The
I
big
get hit by a
cheese?
car. No, if I get hit by a car, you take over kind of guy, person.
Oh, okay.
And then you have maybe some shows can have up to 10 writers. Sometimes it gets pretty crazy. And then you usually brainstorm. You go, all right, so we want to go here, we want to go there. Somebody have an idea. What do we want to do with this? What should we do with it? Blah, blah, blah. And then there's notations on a whiteboard or on index cards. And then at the end of the day, the head writer and usually first chair will sit down and start organizing all those notes into episodes. And then those episodes are given to each of the writers in the board.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
A little peek into that world because I'm not familiar with it. But
It's very
thank
stressful.
you. It sounds like it could be. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, I had fun.
I'd love to talk again because there's just so much to talk about and things that so many writers do not know. And it's great to get, to have a peek into the movie and TV world as well.
Yeah,
So
anytime.
thank you. And was also interesting in finding out things about editing and the different layers and how involved it is. Because again, as writers, we do not understand that process. So, and there's just so much going on. But Thomas, everyone can find you at the right mindset.
Yeah,
And like I said, I'm going to include that link.
I would suggest for anyone, because the right mindset is a pun. It's a play on word. It's right as in to right, not
Yes.
I am right.
WRITE, right? The right
Yeah.
mindset.
But you could go to makeawritelefthehere.com. So you could go makeawritelefthehere.com. That's my website, and you can find everything you need to find on makeawritelefthehere.com. Makeawritelefthehere.com. Yeah.
And that's right, again, WRITE or RIGHT.
It's all normal spelling. Make a right, hey,
Gotcha.
we're driving a car. Make a left right here. It's make a
Right.
right left here. It's
Okay.
the opposite. It's
It gets a
play
little
on-
confusing because the show is the right mindset with WRITE.
Yeah. That's why
And it
I
sounds
just,
like the right one. All right.
Thomas J. Bellezza. No.
I'm glad. There you go. We'll just look you up by name. Well, thank you again. And we will definitely chat again. It was a lot of fun. Very interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'll see you next time. Bye.